Have you ever felt afraid of being alone? In a world full of noise and constant motion, solitude is often seen as a punishment, something we must avoid at all costs. But what if solitude isn't bad? What if, instead of leaving us empty, it could fill us with clarity, inner peace, and strength? In this Zen story, you will meet Haru, a young man who decided to retreat to the mountains to reconnect with himself. What at first seemed like a cold, silent isolation became a profound lesson about true companionship, the companionship of one's own self. Join me on this journey of reflection, serenity, and self-discovery. You'll learn that solitude is not an enemy, but a silent teacher that shows us how to listen to our own heart. Take a deep breath, relax, and stay until the end. This story might just change the way you view silence and your relationship with yourself. Deep in the mountains, where the wind caressed the pine trees and the birds' songs were clearer than any human words, lived a young man named Haru. He had left behind the city, its noise and rush, seeking a place where his heart could hear its own beat. Many called him lonely, as if solitude were a wound. Yet Haru discovered every day that the forest's silence was not empty. It was full of life. The murmur of the river, the crunch of the leaves, and the stillness of the stars were enough companionship for those who knew how to truly observe. Solitude isn't bad, Haru would repeat as he gathered firewood or boiled water for tea. Solitude was a mirror, and in it he saw not sadness, but clarity. It wasn't about fleeing from the world, but about finding oneself before returning to it. During this retreat, he learned something essential. Being alone does not mean being incomplete. Solitude is a garden where inner peace blooms, a path to listen to the deep voice that is often buried beneath the noise of the crowd. Haru woke each day before dawn, when the sky was just a veil of bluish gray and the world was still silent. He would light a small fire and heat water to prepare green tea. As the steam rose in gentle spirals, he felt his breath sink with the calm of the mountains. At first, the silence felt strange, almost unsettling. Accustomed to the city's bustle, the constant chatter, and the metallic clang of bells marking the hours of work, the forest seemed too still. But gradually, he discovered that this stillness was not absence. It was fullness. It was as if every tree, every stone, and every drop of dew had something to say, yet spoke without words. During the first months, Haru wrestled with his own thoughts. He wondered if he was wasting his time, if he should return to the comfort of the life he knew. What if I forget how to talk to people? What if I become strange? He thought. Yet every time he sat by the river, he saw his reflection and realized something new. Solitude wasn't pulling him away from the world, but bringing him closer to his true self. He learned to listen to his mind without fear, letting doubts appear and vanish like clouds. He discovered that, deep within that silence, there was a serene wellspring that never ran dry, a peace that didn't depend on anyone's approval or constant companionship. One afternoon, while gathering medicinal herbs on the hillside, an elderly monk passed by and greeted him with a smile. "Many fear being alone," the monk said. "But how can you hear your own voice if you never stop listening to others? Solitude is a silent teacher, and if you accept it, it will show you who you really are." Haru bowed his head and kept those words in his heart. That night, under a sky full of stars, he understood that being alone was not being empty. Solitude isn't bad. It is an open door to clarity and inner freedom. Winter arrived in the mountains, bringing with it an intense cold that blanketed the paths with frost. Bare branches creaked under the weight of the snow, and the air was so pure that each breath felt like a tiny crystal forming in his lungs. Haru would wake wrapped in blankets and stoke the fire with numb hands, feeling the warmth blend with the calm of the early morning. Many would have felt fear facing a winter alone, without anyone to talk to, without voices filling the empty spaces. But Haru discovered something surprising. Solitude didn't make him feel isolated. It made him feel deeply connected to everything around him. Every spark that leapt from the fire, every snowflake that fell silently, became a reminder that the universe was alive and present. Some days, the wind would lash against the cabin as if trying to tear it down. Instead of feeling afraid, Haru listened as one would to an old friend. "I am here, so you don't forget that everything changes. The weather, even yourself." That invisible voice taught him to flow, to accept what comes without resistance. He spent long hours meditating, watching as his mind brought memories of his past life. Unfinished conversations, lost laughter, broken promises. At first, he felt a knot in his chest. But then he realized that solitude wasn't meant to escape the past, but to face it, let it go, and make space for something new. One day, while walking through the snow-covered forest, he found fresh deer tracks. He followed them to a clearing where the animal drank from a frozen spring. Haru stood still, observing. In that moment, he felt that he was not alone at all. He was accompanied by the mountain, by the wind, by the life breathing in every corner. He understood that solitude is not the absence of company, but the deep presence of everything that exists. As night fell, under the pale moonlight, Haru wrote in his journal, "Being alone does not mean being incomplete. Solitude is teaching me to listen, to know myself, and to love myself unconditionally. When I return to the world, I will not seek company out of fear of emptiness, but to share this fullness." Spring arrived in the mountains like a warm sigh, melting the snow. Green shoots peeked through the rocks, and birds filled the morning with songs that felt like new lessons. Haru sensed that nature was awakening, and with it, something inside him was awakening as well. For months, he had lived with his mind undistracted. He had learned to watch his emotions drift by like leaves floating on a river, without trying to stop them or cling to them. Solitude had shown him that suffering does not come from being alone, but from not understanding oneself. One morning, as he prepared tea at the door of his cabin, he saw the elderly monk who had crossed the forest months before appear again. "I see you've spent the winter here," the monk said with a smile. "What have you learned?" Haru replied without overthinking, "That solitude isn't bad. I didn't come to escape the world, but to find myself. And when you stop fearing being alone, you also stop fearing silence." The monk nodded calmly and added, "When the heart is at peace in solitude, it can be at peace anywhere. Whoever knows themselves is never truly alone, because inside, there is always a friend waiting." That day, after bidding farewell to the monk, Haru walked to the top of a nearby hill. From there, he could see the entire valley. Rivers, villages, winding paths. He thought of the people he knew, the hustle, and the voices that filled the streets. He realized he felt no rejection toward that world, only gratitude. Solitude had given him an invisible gift, the ability to return to the crowd without losing himself in it. As evening fell, he wrote in his journal, "Those who fear solitude fear knowing themselves. But when you learn to listen to your own heart, solitude becomes a temple, not a prison." Summer arrived with clear skies and a sun that filled the mountain with fresh scents. The paths, once covered in snow, were now adorned with wildflowers, and the river ran strong, reflecting the light like a liquid mirror. Haru felt the world breathing with him. One day, while collecting water from the spring, he heard voices in the distance. It was rare for anyone to pass through this corner of the mountain. He hid behind some bushes and saw two weary travelers, their faces covered in dust and sweat. One of them complained loudly, "I can't stand this silence. I'd rather have the noise of the city than this unbearable emptiness." The other remained silent, staring at the path ahead. When the travelers left, Haru reflected, "This is how I saw solitude at first, as an enemy. But now I know it's not emptiness, but space. A space where one can listen, rebuild, and find clarity." That night, while meditating under the stars, Haru had a profound experience. He closed his eyes and felt his breath dissolve into the air, his body and the mountain becoming one. There was no separation between him and the rustle of the insects, nor between his heart and the distant sparkle of the stars. In that silent fusion, he understood that solitude isn't being separate from the world, but being united with everything without distraction. At dawn, Haru wrote in his journal, "Solitude is not absence. It is pure presence. When you accept it, you realize you have never truly been alone. Life is always with you." As the days passed, Haru began to feel that his time in the mountains was coming to an end. Not because he wished to leave, but because he had found what he was seeking: inner clarity. He no longer fled from crowds or feared silence. He had learned that solitude is not a punishment, but a path to self-discovery. He decided to prepare his return with the same calm with which he had arrived. He tidied his cabin, chopped enough firewood for anyone who might need it someday, and left a journal with notes about the trails, the weather, and the medicinal herbs of the area. It was his way of thanking the mountain for the refuge it had provided. One afternoon, while meditating by the river, he remembered his first day there. The nerves, the fear of discomfort, the feeling of wasting time. He smiled at how much he had changed. He no longer felt incomplete when alone, nor did he seek outside what he had to cultivate within. He understood that true companionship begins in one's own heart. Before leaving, he climbed to the top of the hill one last time. He looked out over the horizon and saw the distant village, with smoke rising softly from the chimneys. He thought of the people who lived there, their laughter, their problems, their hurry. He felt neither rejection nor the urge to flee. He felt compassion and connection. "Those who learn to be alone," he wrote in his journal, "can live among others without losing themselves. Solitude is the art of making peace with yourself, so you can offer peace to others." The next day, with calm steps, Haru began descending the path that would lead him back to the world. But something had changed. He no longer carried solitude as a burden, but as a lamp glowing within his chest. Haru's return to the village was peaceful, almost as if the path itself recognized the renewed traveler. He moved without hurry, greeting the trees and birds like old friends. When he arrived at the town, the usual bustle welcomed him. Children running, merchants calling out, neighbors arguing over trivial matters. At first, he noticed the contrast with the mountain's peace. Yet it no longer bothered him. The external noise could not disturb the silence he had cultivated within. He walked through the streets with a serene smile, sensing that every voice, every step, every sound had its place in the great tapestry of life. A curious neighbor approached him. "Haru, where have you been all this time? We thought you had grown tired of us." Haru replied calmly, "I haven't grown tired of you. I went to meet myself so I could truly be here." Soon, people began to notice that something had changed in him. He no longer reacted impatiently to problems. He listened to everyone attentively, as if every word mattered. When someone asked whether he hadn't felt lonely in the mountains, Haru would smile. "Solitude isn't bad. It taught me not to fear myself. When you learn to be at peace with yourself, you are never truly alone." Over time, people began seeking him out for advice. Some wanted to learn to meditate. Others simply wanted to spend a quiet moment beside him. Haru didn't give speeches or sermons. He simply shared tea and listened. The serenity he had cultivated spread like an invisible fragrance. One night, sitting under the village stars, he wrote in his journal, "The world doesn't become quieter, but we can learn to carry calm within us. Solitude was my teacher, and now I walk among people with a heart at peace." Over the months, Haru became a quiet yet luminous presence in the village. He sought no followers and wished to give no lessons. His way of teaching was simply to live with simplicity, without losing the peace he had cultivated in the mountains. One day, a young man approached him, his face weary. "Haru, I feel empty. I surround myself with people, yet I still feel alone. How do I heal this?" Haru looked at him with serenity and replied, "Solitude isn't healed by running from it, but by understanding it. When you learn to be with yourself, you discover that you were never truly empty. You had only forgotten to listen to yourself." The young man didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of those words. Haru invited him to walk together to the outskirts of the village. They sat under a tree and remained silent for a long while. At first, the young man grew restless, but gradually he began to notice the birdsong, the whisper of the wind, and his own breathing. "This silence doesn't hurt," he thought, surprised. Haru smiled at the change he saw and said, "Solitude isn't bad. It's like a lamp in the night. If you accept it, it lights the way to your inner self. If you reject it, all you see is darkness." Over time, the young man began visiting Haru frequently. Other villagers joined as well, not to listen to long speeches, but to learn how to be with themselves. And so, without intending to, Haru turned his personal experience into a shared gift, the teaching that true peace is born from reconciling with one's own solitude. Before going to sleep each night, Haru would open his journal and read the phrase he had written when leaving the mountains. "Those who learn to be alone are never truly alone, because they carry the best company with them, a heart at peace."